recording, get that picked up. Round of applause for part 2. Thank you very much indeed. Good, now we've done all the kind of tiring groundwork there. Just get this mouse on. Good. Right, now we've done all the tiring groundwork and we know where we all stand, which I'll try and praise you a bit more next time, because you'll all be back, I'm sure. We can get to the interesting stuff. Timelessness. Einstein said, the distinction between the past, the present and the future is only an illusion, however persistent. And this is the first thing we've got to look at here, because in my opinion, to be precise, there can't be any illusions. Sounds like an odd thing to say, but if you go and see a magician, whatever that magician is doing, you will always see what you see. You will always see what is happening. You may misunderstand what you see, but there really can't be any illusions. Does that make sense? Misunderstanding happens in our head. This is an example of a truly persistent illusion that I was discussing earlier. You're in a car, you're looking out. You think you can see out through the window, and you think you see the car in front of you out through the window. But in reality, you can't see out through the window. All you can see, if you get my order correctly, I might right size it, all you can see is the light coming in through the window. And then hitting your eye, and then hitting your retina. But when you're driving along, you never think that. You want to clean the window so you can see out through it. Does that make sense? It's kind of confusing. But we only ever see the light coming in. When the astronauts landed on the moon, they almost certainly thought they could look out through the window. But what they were really seeing is the light coming in. It's a kind of confusing thing. So that's just a persistent illusion. There's nothing really to do with time. I'm just showing that the way a persistent illusion stands is it's a misunderstanding. We always see the truth, but we misunderstand it. And when nature works a certain way, if a magician was trying to trick you, he would have to constantly, or she would have to constantly work to trick you. But if it's just a misunderstanding we have about the world, it's kind of a self-working misunderstanding. So virtually all of the books I've read start off by assuming time exists, or asking does time exist, or asking what is time. And there's a subtle problem with this question, because they're asking about time. Does time exist? They're already giving you the idea that it does. Instead of asking does time exist, or what is time, or assuming time obviously exists, we should perhaps ask the question, what do we directly observe? I've got some of my slides in the wrong order here, which is going to be very odd. This is a subtle problem, because we ask about time. I want you to imagine a little story. Imagine there's a couple of explorers going off to explore an island. And on their way, one of them says to the other, I wonder if they'll have any drongos on the island. And the other one says, what do you mean drongos? You go, well, my mum told me about them when I was a kid. They've got 2 heads and 4 wings and 3 legs. And the other one says, well, you sure they exist? He goes, I don't know if they exist. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. You know, we'll find out. Mum used to tell me when I was going to sleep about them. Let's get to the island. So they get to the island, and one of them gets off onto the island and asks one of the locals, do you have any drongos here? They go, what do you mean? You go, well, they've got 2 heads and 4 wings and 3 legs. And the other guy goes, well, I haven't never seen one. He goes, well, have you got any proof that they don't exist? He goes, well, no, I haven't got any proof they don't exist. He goes, well, maybe we'll look for them. Next day, the other person gets off the boat. They bump into a completely different stranger, and they say, do you happen to have any drongos in the island? And the guy goes, do you mean the things with 2 heads and 4 wings and 3 legs? He goes, yeah. He goes, well, my mate was telling me about those just the other day. I've never seen one, but we're all going to look for them tomorrow. And this person thinks, that's amazing, they've already heard of these things, I'll go back and tell Terry. So she goes back and tells Terry, he goes, that's incredible, because the guy I spoke to had never heard of them. And later on, they all go out in a big search party with the locals, very excitedly looking for these things that never existed. But they created the idea. And when you ask someone, does time exist? You ask them, does time exist? And they go, what do you mean? You go, well, this thing with the past and present and the future and the flow and the direction. They go, oh, I don't know, tell me more about it. We can contaminate the thing that we're looking for if we're not careful. I'll give you an example of contaminating the thing we're trying to explore. Is there anyone here who has never seen a picture of this device? Alright, Frank, can you see that picture?
I've never seen that before.
Can you see it now?
Okay.
So you have seen it.
Well, it's Russian, isn't it?
It's Russian, but everyone here has seen this device, yeah? What I'm saying is that by showing you the picture, I'm already contaminating your point of view. This is a Russian spacecraft called Venera 14. Sounds like a disease to me. Venura 14. This is actually a picture of Venura 13. I don't know whether they can get a picture of 14, whatever. This is a thing that they sent all the way to Venus, and one of its experiments was to check the surface of Venus and see what it was made. So they send this thing 200 million miles, whatever it is, they get there. They set everything up, press the go button, sent out a probe into the surface of Venus, and it came back with the answer that Venus was probably made out of plastic or metal, one of these two things. The reason is because when it landed and they ejected the lens caps off their own cameras, the lens cap fell in such a way that the probe went straight onto the lens cap and measured what it was made out of. So they sent this thing 200 million miles and it came back and told them what its own lens cap was made of. So they contaminated the thing that they're looking at. And that's a problem. I say metal or plastic because I don't know what it was made of.
Yeah, but you emphasise on what they look at, what they see,
yeah,
right, and on the eye. Say I'm blind.
Yeah.
How do I, and blind people and deaf people,
yeah,
they know what's going on, they know about...
Yeah, because you'd hear and you sense it. All I'm saying with that thing about the vision
yeah,
is that throughout our lives, we feel like we're looking at Steve over there. Of course we're seeing Steve over there, the light's coming from it, it's hitting our eyes, it's going to the back of our eye. But what we're really seeing is an image in our eye. It doesn't matter, it works perfectly. And this isn't about optics, this conversation is only about time. And the only reason I'm talking about that optic thing is to show you that it's something that constantly happens, that works perfectly, but we may actually get it slightly wrong. If you're wearing glasses now, if you take your glasses off, do I start to look fuzzy?
Yeah.
Alright. Do you think that's because I've become fuzzy? Or because the image on the back of your eye has become fuzzy?
The image on the eye.
Right, so all you ever see is the image on the back of your eye. Does that make sense? It's a kind of unnerving thing to discuss.
But then if I couldn't see you, then I'd have to...
I'm just using an example for people who can see. I can't pick an example that works for every single possible being. But we could talk about ears, you know, if you get a glass and you tap your finger on a glass, you can hear that noise.
Yeah.
But if you bring that nearer, it's a different noise. All you hear is the noise that reaches your ear. But when we hear a distant sound, we think, oh yeah, I can hear that, it's a long way away. And we think we're hearing something a long way away. You're not. You're hearing something that's touching your eardrum. Of course it's faint, because it's travelled a long distance. But this isn't about optics, and I've got to get moving because it always takes so long.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying there are things that are persistently misunderstood, and it doesn't matter that they're misunderstood because they work. Time works. Time works brilliantly. Money works, but money doesn't exist. You know, if money really exists, and we all owe the Chinese £1 trillion, easy. We just crank up the machines, we make some more of this money, if that's what money really is. So I'm saying, money works, the language of money works, but that doesn't mean that money really exists. And time works, and the language of time works, it doesn't mean it really exists. The idea of time works, but I'm going to try and show you that it's a misunderstanding that works perfectly. Alright? And what I'm trying to say with this little picture is, if you turn up on an island and you ask them about a thing that doesn't even exist, if you ask the question the wrong way, it'll seem to exist. You can contaminate what you're talking about. And the whole point between these slides here, just to get us back on track, is because all of these books seem to start by assuming time exists, or by asking does time exist, or by asking what is time. And these seem to be completely innocent questions. But to me, they show that you've contaminated the thing that you're looking at, possibly. If time does not exist, then this could be a tiny error that gets easily overlooked, and so the problem builds on. So, an example of this. The problem with time is that if we assume time exists, it will look like time exists. You'll never see anything to prove it wrong. If you go to the island looking for Drongo evidence, you will never find anything to prove that they don't exist. So you will find that your assumption is never defeated. Darren Brown is obviously a mentalist here in England. That's for the international audience. A mentalist is someone who looks like they can read minds. If you took someone to one of his shows, a kid, and you said, oh, we're going to see a mentalist, this guy can read minds. They can actually read minds. You go, really? Is that possible? Go, yeah, have a look, see for yourself. That kid would go to the show and he would come away convinced that people can read minds. We see a lot of evidence that seems to support his assumption and no evidence that seems to contest it. So you could come away thinking mind reading is probably possible, or even definitely possible for some people. And the error here is that if you make an assumption and your assumption seems to be confirmed, that's not the same as having a proof. And if you assume that time exists and you look at the world as if time exists, it will seem to be confirmed. In my opinion, the only way you can see through that misunderstanding is if you keep asking the question, what if things just move and change? As they move and change, they don't create a past behind them, and as they move and change, it's not because there's a future coming towards them. And it's not because there's a thing called time flowing. You have to ask that question and see where that gets you. So perhaps it would be better to first ask, when we look at the world around us, what do we basically see? If those explorers had gone to the island and asked the people, what is there here? What do we see? And kept looking, then they may have found that drongos exist, or they may not have, but they wouldn't have contaminated the environment. It's safer to ask, what do we see? Quick check reveals that we basically see things existing, moving, and interacting. That's something existing, that's something moving, how did that get there? And that's something interacting. Mousetrap. I don't know who made it, MD Games, something like that. That's the first thing we see, that things exist and they move and they interact. That's fairly obvious. This leads to the critical question, which is, if objects in the world could just exist, move and interact, would this explain everything that we attribute to time? And that's what I'm going to break down here and see if we can disassemble the past, disassemble the future, disassemble the flow. And remember, with the past and future, an important thing to look at is we seem to be able to remember the past, but we can't remember or see the future. So these things seem to be distinctly different. These are the distinctions that Einstein said he thought were an illusion. So it's worth looking at that and thinking, well, yeah, of course we can see the past. Yeah, half of us here are kind of agreeing that time doesn't exist, but we still think we can see the past. So what's going on? That makes sense? I'm trying to do this at a reasonable pace, so you're not all bored, and we can get drinks in at the end, but without going. So anyway, that's the question. Question there, Eric?
Yeah.
Okay. It'll all be on the internet as well, so you can always look at it again. I'm sure you all will. So this is the question, gentlemen. Fingers on the buzzers, please. Question one. You know, St. Augustine who's one of the first people who talked about time. Galileo, the guy who did the pendulums. Newton, one of the first and greatest mathematicians. Maybe not one of the first mathematicians, but a guy who made major breakthroughs in understanding gravity and the motion of the planets. Einstein, of course, he did relativity and stuff like that. Hawking, who's written A Brief History of Time, one of the most blockbusting selling books of all time. So I'm pretending if you were to ask more questions, generally if matter could just exist and interact, that is not over a thing called time, whatever that's meant to mean, would this be enough to explain everything that we attribute to time? And I'm guessing that these people didn't ask that question. They asked, what is time? Or does time exist? Or they assumed that it obviously exists. But they don't seem to have checked. Even Einstein, who's the man probably I respect the most on the planet, didn't seem to check. And he didn't seem to consider that perhaps the contents of your mind just change. And you create an order of events in your mind. And of course that order makes sense, but it doesn't also prove there's a past. So I'm saying there's no such thing as time, there is just movement and change. How did that go? And this is not an issue of semantics, as many people then say, oh yeah, but it's all words, you know, this is just a system that we use to create, it's a narrative, or of course we made up the words and now we use them, and so on and so on. As I explained, if you say gravity is just a word, but then when you drop something, it falls. It doesn't fall because we made up the word gravity and we all agree on it. And if we all decided not to use the word gravity or not to agree on its meaning, we wouldn't all start floating in the air, unless we try really hard. It's worth a go. Had some good stuff the other week. So this is not an issue of semantics. This is a very important thing. People go, oh yeah, you're just saying the same thing with different words. I'm not saying the same thing with different words, because all that stuff that I pointed to earlier was showing you that people think there's a past and a future and a flow and direction. I'm saying I can show you that that is not the case. We may want to say, but time is the word we use to summarise existence, movement, change and interaction and so on. And these things exist, so of course time exists. It's just semantics. That's what a lot of people will say. Time, yeah, we know what time is. That's what we mean by it. And when you consider this, time is just the word we use to summarise existence, movement and change. you've got to remember that Hawking video, and you've got to say, well, what was he talking about? Firing a bullet through time, firing a bullet through movement and change into the past. Doesn't make sense. It's not adding up. Why did he say this was a paradox that gives cosmologists nightmares? Why didn't he say it's all very simple, it's all just here now, we just use time as a shortcut word? And he didn't say that because he didn't believe it. Don't worry, you don't have to read all this. I'm just showing you because people go on about semantics and it irritates me so much. What I'm saying is that we observe that things exist and they move and they change. They can interact with each other, they exist. That's it. That's all we're saying. Things just keep doing that. They don't create the past as they do it. They don't come out of the future to make things happen. If you're talking about time, the theory of time, which is an attempt to explain what we see, they say things move and change over time, things interact over time, things exist over time. So this word time is constantly used. It's apparently pointing something. Time exists, merged with space. Time passes. As we get older, time passes. Time likes to flow at an arrow. Intervals of time can exist between events. You know, I was born, then my sister was born. There is a temporal, time-based order to events. This happened, then that happened, then another thing happened. And I'm agreeing that there's a kind of an order, but I'm saying it's not a temporal order because as things happen, they aren't recorded anywhere in an order. And if they're not recorded, then that record doesn't exist. You can't have a temporal record if there isn't a record. Don't know how far I'm going to get through these slides tonight. Causes create effects in the future. The past exists, the future exists. Again, don't have to concentrate on these. I'm just showing you that this is the column that time suggests. And this is what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying that everything's here now and that it moves and it changes. This is very different to saying the time column is very different to just saying there's just movement and change and it's always now. Stephen Hawking is not saying that it's just movement and change and it's always now. He's saying it looks like you travel through space and time. And I know exactly, well, I don't know exactly, I know basically why he's saying that and understand the reasoning behind it. And there's a definite truth behind a lot of what he's saying, but it can still just be explained in terms of everything being here now. So we apply this question, what if things that just exist and move, to the past and present and future? The past. What I'm going to try and do now is change your mind. One of you is going to have his mind, his or her mind changed. Take a look at this symbol. Have a look at this random symbol. There's nothing special about the symbol at all. Now, without looking at the symbol, Frank, you can be my guinea pig for this. You see if you can recreate that symbol there. Can you get that in on camera 3? Yeah. Alright, excellent. Up here, good. Pen. So now, we've got this symbol, which Frank has nicely created, and he didn't even get a round of applause for it. So we move on to the next slide and we see if these match. And they do match.
It's magic.
Magic. Now the only way they could have matched is if Frank, when he looked at that original symbol, had the contents of his mind changed. You must have a version of that symbol in your head now that you were able to store and then recreate. And the mechanism doesn't matter because we proved that it can happen. We proved that one way or another you've got that mechanism. That's all we need to know. To do that, we didn't have to add anything to you, we didn't have to take anything from you, we just changed the existing contents of your mind. Make sense? Mm-hmm. If I was to ask you, did you draw this symbol? You would answer yes, actually. Would you say you drew it in the past?
Yes.
How do you know that you drew it in the past?
Because I don't have it now, it's over there.
It's over there. And because you remember drawing it in the past.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that when we remember this stuff, we're only looking inside our heads. We're looking in the contents of our heads. If the contents of your head could just change, that would explain everything that you saw. It doesn't prove that there's also a temporal past. Does that make any sense? We assume that that happened in the past. And I'm saying, does the past exist? I know the expression, I know what it means, of course. It works. But the Eiffel Tower exists, but does the past exist? And I'm suggesting it doesn't. We think it does. That little experiment proves that the contents of your mind can change. That's all it changes. And it doesn't have to change over time. There doesn't have to be a thing called time flowing for that to change. What has to happen is light has to hit the picture, it has to go into your eye, it has to hit the back of your eye, it has to go into your brain. So light has to exist, your brain has to exist, it all has to be turned on. Chemicals have to move around, but they're all just things that are here now, that are moving and changing position and shape. If we didn't have any lights down here, this experiment actually wouldn't work, because there wouldn't be any light to hit your eye to change your brain. So this is actually one of the key things here, energy and the flowing of energy. People go, oh yes, but it flows over time, and I'm saying, well, what do you mean by this over time thing? Why can't it just flow? That was the question I asked you. Have you any idea how it got there? You know, because you have a memory in your head. You don't go back in the past to check how it got there. You literally just look in your head, but you assume that that also relates to the past. And I think everyone assumes it. We could video that with different types of cameras. We could have a video camera, a film camera, anything else. If you get an inked roller and you move it over a piece of paper, it's very obvious that this roller made that ink. And we all think we work out what happened in the past. But really, we're just deducing what must have happened from the state of the stuff that's here now. And there's a very subtle difference here, because all of this seems to suggest that the past exists. I'm saying you have to be very, very careful. What if things could just exist and move? That would explain this. It feels like something's been robbed from us when I say that. Yeah, but where did time go? It didn't go anywhere. It's like saying to a kid there aren't any dragons, and he says, well, where did they go? You go, they didn't go anywhere, you just mistakenly thought they existed in the first place.
How do you get at the sequencing there?
Like, say, in this case.
The paper. Well, yes.
Yes. As things happen, the only way you'll see it is if you ask yourself this question: what if things could just exist and move? If things could just exist and move, say this roller was going along here and this film was turning around here, and the light hits these images and then it goes into the camera, then it creates images on the frame, you get a sequence. And in a sense, things happen in a sequence, I wouldn't deny it. The question is this a temporal order? Is this sequence created and stored anywhere? You see what I'm saying? Yes, things happen in sequence. You can't put the roof of a house on until you build the walls. It just won't work. And it's a very subtle thing. And you want to ask, imagine the universe where everything was just happening and changing. That's what it's doing. How would that look? Would that change the contents of your head in a certain way? And it would. You see what I'm saying? You would record the sequence. The question is, we look at our minds and we think that proves a thing called time exists. And Stephen Hawking starts questioning, can we travel through it? Can we send bullets back through it? And I'm going, well, slow down. It looks to me as if things just exist and move and change. I can see where this sequence thing comes up. Of course World War II happened after World War I. Otherwise they wouldn't have called it II, would they? But I'm just saying, look carefully. Is that sequence stored anywhere else? At all? Other than in the stuff around us? And if you look at it and you realise that if things just move and change, that will change your mind. That will change rolls of film. That will change rolls of videotape. That will create footprints in cement that dry and become solidified. It looks to me as if every single bit of evidence we have that suggests that time exists can be explained if things just exist.
It can't be there constantly.
Constantly, how do you mean? Well, I'm saying there's nothing other than constant.
Yeah, no, but everything that happens at every moment can't be there all the time.
No. Well, this is the problem, is that if we get this idea of time and we feed it in, and go, oh, so everything that's happening is happening all the time. You go, no, because the problem is you're feeding the idea back in of time. And then you have to stop and go, what if things just exist and move and change? That's what they do. When they move and change, they can do it in a very orderly way, like a train going down tracks. Or they can do it in a very random way, like a balloon blowing around the air when you let go of it. But why do we get this idea that everything... If we imagine this sequence, then we start thinking, is all of the sequence happening at once? And I'm going, well, there really isn't a sequence. Things exist and move and change. If they've got energy. These candles are burning because there's energy inside them and the energy's coming out. You know, if you had a torch here with no batteries in it, or flat batteries, it wouldn't do anything. It's only ever energy releasing. Am I getting there, man?
Yeah, yeah, I get it.
Don't take it lightly, take it lightly. I want to make sure we wrap this up at a good pace, that's the problem. I always overproduce the slides, anyway.
They've got many more since the first time.
No, they haven't. Trust me, I reduced it, but we haven't got through a lot of them. But don't worry, I'm going to trace through these. We'll get on it. It's all going to be good. We'll make the last orders. That's what I'm worried about the most. Here's a £1 million bet. To anyone here, if I had £1 million and I said I will give you this £1 million, I won't be unreasonable, if you can give me evidence that the 1966 World Cup happened, how many people would take that bet on? Just needs to be some reasonable evidence, and most people would agree, proves that it happened. And you get £1 million. So anyone who wouldn't take that bet on? It's the easiest way.
What do you accept as evidence?
Anything reasonable, anything that, you know... Video, anything like that. And then you get your £1 million. Okay, anyone wouldn't take that bet on? Okay, now what that proves to me is that all of you are convinced that there is stuff out there now that suggests the past happened or exists. Do you see what I'm saying? You're convinced that just the stuff around us now will be sufficient evidence to point to the existence of the past. Does that make sense? And I'm saying, certainly things happen. As they happen, Grandad died, that's in the past. And I'm saying, let's be very clear. Do we really mean the past is a thing or a place that exists and Grandad's death is in it? Do we mean there is a record of events that's created as they happen? Or are we just using the expression because we know what it means and it makes sense? And I'm saying we're just using the expression. So everyone would agree that the World Cup happened, but that doesn't prove that the past happened or there's a record in it. And when Stephen Hawking has given us that example of a scientist shooting through a time porthole, that's because he's suggesting that there really is a future and a past that do span between things. Time does flow, it's not just all here now. And I'm trying to show you that I can prove otherwise. We seem to think that physical evidence and the contents of our mind prove that the temporal past exists. We put these two bits of evidence together and we think they point to a third thing. Time tunnel, of course. It's great, isn't it? Someone said it's funny about Doctor Who, you know, you can travel in 4 dimensions, space and time, but he always ends up in Wales in the present day. What's going on there? So we look at that, physical evidence and mental evidence. We think it proves that time exists and flows. We can look at dinosaur bones and tree growth rings and sedimentary rocks and our own memories, and together we think we've cleverly deduced a third thing that can only be seen if we think very cleverly about it. And I'm saying that's an assumption that will always seem to be true. But ask the question, what if things can just exist and move? What if they just exist and move if they've got energy in them? And that changes your mind. I can see exactly how this misunderstanding or illusion might arise. I can also see, I believe, that many of those initial people who really worked on time don't seem to have looked at that possibility and dismissed it. This is a very important point. Consider a witness to an accident. There's a car crashes in a tree, there's oil leaking from the car, there's footprints running away from the car, there's skid marks behind the car, whatever. A witness takes pictures, there's a glove lost at the scene. But all of this is just physical evidence that's here now. But they will call it memories of the past. If a policeman phones up this person several months later and says, well, you're witness to the crash, we know there was a crash, we can still see the skid marks and things, but they're there. They go, yeah, I've got some pictures on my camera, I've developed them, they're physical here, I can pass them to you if you want, I can give you a paper cut with them, they really exist. And the policeman says, yeah, we've got all that kind of stuff, but do you remember what happened? And they say, yeah, I remember. 2 weeks ago at about 6 o'clock, a guy came in and then this happened, then that happened, then I heard a bang and then someone ran away and that's what happened. They'll talk about the physical existing contents of their minds in terms of them being the past. But what they're really doing is looking at stuff that's in their head now. That's what they're actually doing. And we've got to be careful about assuming that that proves there's an extra dimension before we take that idea too far. We can point to a map and talk about it as if it really was the territory it represents. We're here, we've got to get there, it's 200 miles. But of course it's not, it's about 1.5 inches, and we're not really there. You know, we're here, and that isn't there, that's just 2 inches over there. But it'd be pointless to be so pedantic. Though I usually am. So we look at a map, and we talk about it as if it's the territory, and that's fine because that works. But for this to be legitimate, we must be able to prove that the actual territory exists. Otherwise this is just a map. This could be one of those made-up maps that you get in, you know, Narnia or whatever, The Hobbit. With time, We point to and talk about fossils, books, paintings, photos, videos, memories, and so on, ad infinitum, as if they are maps pointing to the territory, as if they are maps pointing to the existence of the past, as if they are maps that prove the past exists. Videotape, fossils, books, memories, paintings, photographs, all seem to be proof of what happened in the past. This is the Berlin Wall coming down, this is obviously a trilobite from a while ago, this is a famous book or whatever, this is the Battle of Waterloo, this is Brunel building one of his great bridges. Of course these things happened, and these things prove that the past exists, and I'm saying they don't. They just prove that things can move and change. If things could move and change, could this be created? Yes. If things move and change, could you get a video? Yes. If things move and change, can you put ink on a paper in a certain pattern? Yes. Same thing here. Can light hit a photographic plate and create a record like a footprint in cement? Yes. If things just move and change, that would also explain all this stuff. Without exception, all of this is just stuff that is literally just here now. All of this stuff, you can pick it up and bang someone on the head with it. And you go, what's that? Oh, it's in the past, it couldn't hurt you. It's all just stuff here that's here now. And while it's seen as maps representing or proving the past, they can only actually prove that matter can exist, change and interact now. And now is a redundant word. People often say, oh yeah, now, the moments keep changing, it's an infinitely moment, oh this moment's gone, that moment's gone. But if you look around, it's all just here constantly. It's only if you get this idea that there's a thing called time flowing that you start thinking there's this infinitely thin moment that's disappearing. You look at a hand going round on a clock, you go, oh yes, that's the future it's heading into, that's the past behind it, I wonder how thin this bit is. It's not, it's a hand going round on a clock. A clock is just a numbered dial. You're looking at a motor going round. So I'm trying to say that things are much, 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 much simpler than we make them out to be if we imagine this thing called time exists. So the question is there a third temporal record? Does the past exist or not? Because if it does exist, then it does exist, the past. And if it exists, then time probably exists. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. And you can see how easy it is to start undermining this idea when you point out that a lot of people haven't really thought about how the contents of their mind just change. And how everything is just here, just moving, changing. But that could give you the impression that there's an extra thing called time. If you go back to remembering Galileo swinging the pendulum, he's just looking at the thing moving. And he gives a number to it. It's a funny thing as well that we often think of time as constantly flowing forwards, but have you ever seen a cloud go backwards? Don't they always seem to go forwards? It's because when you look at them, that's what you define forwards as. It's the direction that things move. And if I want to go down the path, I reach forwards into my pocket, I take my card out forwards, I put it forwards into the machine, money comes out forwards, I give that money forwards to the barman, he gives me my change forwards back, he pours beer forwards into the glass, and then I drink the beer forwards and it comes out forwards. It's always forwards, that's what I'm saying. If objects in the world could just exist and move, would that explain the past? I kind of think they do. It would. Anyone want to have a question session on that? I'm quite happy to keep going here. Alright, let's look at the present. This is always an interesting one. We can say the future and the past might not exist, but we go, yeah, but time still has to pass for things to move now. If there was no time, everything would be solid, locked, you know. Time passes as things move. Look, we say a car does 100 miles an hour, and this makes perfect sense. That's a picture of 100 miles, I checked it earlier. This is a picture of an hour, that's a picture of a car. It's my car at the moment, I can't afford the insurance. And because that expression 100 miles an hour makes sense, and because we know miles in a sense exist, I wouldn't question that, it's a distance, and cars exist, and we assume hours must exist. I can't instantly get to Birmingham, I'll have to travel there at speed. But all we actually observe is that the car moves and the earth spins. This is what we actually observe. Any clock that you've got, any timing device you've got, starts off trying to model the spinning of the earth. The earliest accurate clocks were made by Harrison when he was trying to create these clocks for the Navy. If you have a good clock, you can navigate very well. What they really would have been happy with would have been a model of the earth that span at the same speed that the earth does. Because that's all they really wanted to know, is what direction the earth was pointing in relation to the sun. They don't really want to know the time. It's always now. Have a look. So when we talk about a car doing 100 miles an hour, what we actually observe is that the car moves and the earth spins. But then, it so happens that if you look at a point on the equator, you get a little desert island with a palm tree, and you do some maths, this equator point is travelling about 1,000 miles an hour. The Earth is about 25,000 miles around, it spins once a day, we call that hours, blah, 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 blah. It so happens then, if our car's doing 100 miles an hour, and this is doing about 1,000 miles an hour, that the car is moving at 1/10 the speed of a point on the equator. So we could express the speed of the car. You could say, yeah, how fast are we going? Oh, just doing 1/10 the speed of the equator. And that would give you all the information you wanted to know about the car without using the expression hours, or suggesting that time exists, or that it passes, or that it's needed for things to move, or that units of time like hours can be sensibly talked about. And if we do that, we have to look, what's the difference between saying miles per hour or 1/10 the speed of a point on the equator? Obviously, 1/10 the speed of the equator is a very long, kind of winded way, but we're looking for the truth here. This is not semantics. This is not just a different way of expressing the same thing. In a sense, it is semantics in that the time-based view adds a lot of ideas that aren't really proven or shown. Miles per hour suggests that miles and hours exist. Obviously, miles per hour. Hours suggest that time exists. This suggests that time is needed for motion, or that things take time while they're doing it, or time passes anyway, whatever things are doing. Time suggests that the past and the future exist. So all the way from this tiny thing up here, we've got hours or units of time, time exists, time passes, it's needed as a function, and the past and the future exist. All of these things come out of this. 1/10 the speed of a point on the equator suggests that things can exist. The car can exist, the earth can exist, the equator can exist, obviously not exactly the equator, but a point on the edge of the earth can exist. It suggests that things can move, the earth can spin, the car can move. And it suggests that we can compare the speeds of different things. This is all Galileo did at the beginning. He compared the speed of some water coming out of a water clock, so to speak, or swinging of a pendulum, to the speed of a projectile or anything else you want to compare it to. If you say, oh yes, that's time, you're putting in an unproven thing back into the equation. That's not a valid thing to do. Logically, you can't reach a false conclusion, then use that false conclusion at the beginning of your argument. It's not a valid thing to do. So we start by assuming that miles per hour is the proof that time exists, and we end up kind of saying, oh yeah, but time exists anyway. It's almost like talking to a child who's lying. Every time you pin them down on a lie, they go back and change what they said. No, that's not what I said anyway, I meant this instead. It's like they're trying to wiggle out of it. We observe that things move. As the Earth rotates, it rotates 15 degrees, but we call that an hour. Of course, it never actually rotates 15 degrees, it's just constantly rotating. It doesn't go click, click, it all go, as it stopped here. Usain Bolt, we time him. He does 100 meters in 10 seconds, but of course, when this guy's running along the track, we call that 100 meters. When this hand here is moving around here, we call that 10 seconds. If you had a big enough clock, it would just be 100 millimeters, wherever it is. We see things moving, two things moving, we compare them. In reality, Usain Bolt just travels 10,000 times further and faster than the tip of a second hand. None of this proves that there's a past or a future or a thing called time that exists. This hand will only move if you put a battery in the clock or wind up the spring. This man will only move if you give him shredded wheat or cornflakes in the morning. It's energy coming out. All of these people are running because they've got energy within them that is coming out. Not because there's also a thing called time that is passing, in my opinion. All we observe is that the Earth is spinning and things are moving. This was one of the things when I was in the bath, I realised I was waiting for the sun set. And then I thought, well, there's always a sunset. You know, the sunset's just always over here, or over there, I always get them confused. And the Earth is constantly spinning. The sunset is a place here. If you had a spaceship, you could hover in this area and just stay as the Earth spun beneath you, and you'd just be in the sunset, watching it constantly change. This is a watch that I own. It's a 24-hour watch. I've got to give it back in about 3 minutes. That's a joke. I photoshopped these hands out. This hand goes round, you can see the numbers here. Will go around 12 to 24. This hand goes around once a day. This hand spins at the same rate that the Earth spins, and that's all you really want, particularly me, from a watch. If you're on the North Pole or the South Pole, this hand would constantly point at the sun as it went round, probably the South Pole. You could just put it down on the ground, and that would point at the sun, because the hand is spinning at the same rate that the Earth spins. And that's the essence of a clock. But if we go around calling these things hours, you want to go, well, hold on, what are you saying? Because that's a very big leap to reach. Things move, we can compare them, in my opinion. So if objects in the world could just exist, move and interact, would this explain what we attribute to the present? I think it would. Any questions? Good. The future. I realised it's detention. Just checking what the time is, ironically. We're doing it. The future.
The time.
Yeah, I know. I told you at the beginning, I go, oh, 3 minutes. Oh, you said minutes. Yes, John, but as I explained, it's just that the Earth rotates. Steph wants us out before this bit gets round there. And even that's a made-up rule.
But once again, you're talking about time going forward, but in your watch. But it can go back, can't it? Because if you get in an aeroplane and go to America, you're going forward.
John, have you been listening to anything I've said over the last... Yeah, I hear what you're saying, yes. You have these time zones and things like this, and people, oh, we went back in time. Of course, we know you didn't go back in time. I mean, you could be up here and walk this way. People disagree on the readings that they've set these machines to, certainly. All this is a motor. It's got a battery in it, and the battery sends out a signal, goes through an oscillating crystal instead of a pendulum, that makes this thing rotate at a steady rate. All this thing proves is that motors and batteries can be wired together with oscillators, and that things can move at a steady rate. It doesn't prove that as things move, they need a thing called time. And as things move, this thing called time passes, and it flows into a thing called the future, and into a thing called the past, and it comes out of a thing called the future. It doesn't prove any of that. It proves that motors and batteries and crystals exist, and that things can move. If we assume that time exists, we'll go, oh, this thing shows us the progression of time, and so on and so on and so on. And I'm trying to show you that from the very beginning that assumption isn't correct. The very beginning of our thought that time exists is we remember the past in our minds. We see babies growing up, getting big and strong, then getting frail and weak. I see all of that happening, but I'm saying it just happens. It doesn't happen over a thing called time. It doesn't prove that there's an extra thing called time that exists. Particularly not in the sense that you could build a bridge from one part of it to another and fire a bullet back through it and kill yourself. Yeah, that's a very fundamental kind of point. You see what I'm saying? It's not, that's a tangible thing they're talking about. And there are paradoxes, things like the twins paradox, where you could fly away in a spaceship at great speed. If you had a twin brother, and when you come back, you'd find your twin brother had aged more than you. And even that only proves that things can change at different rates. We'll get onto that if we have time. It never gets old. Old! The future. We go down to the park and we want to see the future arriving. Of course, the future constantly arrives. You know, we don't know if it's going to rain tomorrow. That must be a fact of the future. If you go down the park and literally do this one day and sit, all you will see is constant motion. Some of it very orderly motion, some of it very random motion. You'll only ever see clouds going forwards because we kind of define forwards as the direction things move, and you're kind of blind to it, you know. And even if everything in the universe is going forwards, even if there is an explosion that is heading to a higher state of disorder, that only proves that there's an explosion that's heading towards a higher state of disorder. It doesn't prove that as it happens, there's a thing called time that's got a direction. All of these things that move will have energy in them, and all you're ever seeing is the release of energy in orderly or chaotic ways. We will call those ways predictable or unpredictable.
You see the change in energy. You can't destroy energy.
No, it'll have to flow from one place to another.
Okay, it goes, yeah.
It makes me wonder if the whole universe is kind of expanding out and they're going to fall back in and expand out and it's all going to happen again. Maybe I've already given this.
I believe in that point of view.
It's an idea. But the problem is, as it's expanding now, it seems to be accelerating, so it looks like it's heading for a heat death. But I don't know. But who knows? But the point is that even conversations like that, people look at them and they frame them in terms of time. We can do a calculation. We look at the stars, we see that all the stars are expanding away from us. We do a calculation, we go, aha, the universe is 13.75 billion years old. And someone goes, no, 13.76. And we start refining this number. And people confuse the refining of this number with a proof that a thing called time exists. Oh, we got this number very accurate, so time must exist. You go, no, you just got a number very accurate. It's a very meaningful number, but it doesn't prove that as things move, a thing called time also flows. It kind of proves that as the universe exploded, if there was an Earth spinning somewhere else, it would go around 30.75 billion times. But it doesn't prove there's a future and a past. Once this assumption gets fully ingrained, people will look for anything to back it up, or assume that anything they see backs it up. So what I'm saying here with the future is, and we're doing it now, look now, see if you ever see the future arrive, or if you just see a bloke in front of you talking nonsense. You get a candle, heat comes out of the candle, it literally comes out of the candle. A candle is a fascinating thing. If you buy a candle, you're walking down the street, it's amazing what you've got in your hand. All this trapped energy and heat that seems so inert, it's incredible. It's a process that happens. But energy from in here comes out. A car, energy from in the fuel comes out. That's why the car moves. It's just there, it's in existence, it moves. It doesn't come out of the future. It doesn't flow into the past. It comes out of the petrol tank, it flows out through the wheels and into the atmosphere. Same thing here. If you assume that there's a thing called the future and a thing called time, you will assume that the future is arriving, this is something that's happening, and we don't know if this car is going to crash, and so on and so on. But if you don't, you'll see that things just happen. It's always there. Where anything is happening, energy is flowing or being released. You get a balloon, you can let it go. If it's one of those kind of straight balloons, it will go in a straightish kind of line, quite a predictable path. If it's kind of weird balloon, off balance, it will go in a weird path. If you stick a pin in it, it might just explode suddenly. So things can happen in orderly or chaotic or sudden or slow ways, but it's always energy that's released. When you crop a balloon and you hear a bang, the funny thing to realise is that the bang is in the balloon. It's just sitting there waiting to get out. I say waiting, but it's in there, otherwise it can get out. If you get a balloon and you don't pop it up, fill it up there, and you stick a pin in it, it won't go bang. You literally put the bang in as you're breathing into it, and it comes out. It's not a future event, it's just a thing that's there. So if objects in the world could just move and interact, would this explain what we attribute to the future? I think it would. Any questions? This always feels like a test of people's desperateness to get home. I have, but I also want to get home. For your information, it's 22:47 now. Should we try a few more? Okay. Past, present, future. I think that I've covered these things, and I can show you their misunderstanding. We still have this question, why can we remember the past but not the future? That seems to be that critical distinction. This is what Einstein was talking about. For we physicists, we think the distinction between the past and present and the future is just an illusion of how we're persistent. And I can explain it, I hope. Bridging the past, present and the future. Why we see the past but not the future. Aging and no temporal order of events. We'll move through these fairly quickly. Imagine this thought experiment. You have a bridge. The bridge has got an error, design flaw in it. Very simple bridge, this one. And you get 3 students, and you give them a model of this bridge, and you give them some instructions. And they each go into a separate room. And they come out one by one. And the first one comes out and says, the reason that bridge collapsed 100 years ago is because it's got a design flaw. The second one comes out and says, don't build that bridge because it's got a design flaw. If you build it, it's going to collapse. And the third one comes out and says, you've got to get people off that bridge now. It's got a design flaw. Phone them up immediately. The thing is that all of them are doing the same thing. They're looking at a model of a bridge, who knows whether it exists or not, and they've been given some instructions. One of them thinks that they're thinking about the past, and one of them thinks that they're thinking about the future, and one of them thinks that they're thinking about the present. But all they're doing is thinking. They're all here now thinking. They're all here doing exactly the same kind of thing, the same kind of calculation, but they're framing it in a different way in their mind. And that's all that happens. You know, you can think, what's it going to be like in a billion years, or you can think, I like cheese on toast, but all you're doing is thinking. You're changing the contents of your mind. Not eat now. Doesn't work. Direction of time. Got a vase that smashed, everyone happy. People always go, yeah, but what about entropy? What about things that smash? What about things that break? The arrow of time, according to Stephen Hawking, obviously a brilliant man, I admire and respect him a great deal. He's saying there are 3 arrows of time. Thermodynamic arrow of time. Put a cup of tea down, it tends to get cold. My bedroom always gets messy. Vases will tend to break if they fall off a thing, onto a floor, but you'll never see the pieces fly up and come together. Cosmological arrow of time. The universe seems to have started in a big bang and it seems to be constantly expanding. That's a direct observation. Psychological arrow. We remember being smaller and going to school and then getting our driving lesson and doing all these different things. We remember an order. If you assume time exists, all of these will seem to be arrows that point to the order, the direction of time, and they all seem to support each other. But if you don't look at it that way, you can see that maybe vases just break, and maybe the universe is expanding, and maybe as we walk down the street and we see a bench and a lamppost and a postbox, we get a memory of a bench and a lamppost and a postbox in our head. We create an order in our minds. That's what I'm saying, vases break. If assume time exists, you'll think that that's an example of something time does, or a point of time. Otherwise you'll just go, oh, I get it, vases break. The universe expands, we create memories in our head. The past and the future. Why can we see the past but not the future? Imagine some people going from Dover to Calais, and they're on this boat and it's heading in that direction, and they have breakfast in Dover and they're going to have lunch in Calais. Well, all their heads, in all of these people's heads, they'll have memories of Dover and what's happening there, which isn't happening there now. But they won't know what's happening in Calais. But the thing to realise is that things are constantly happening in Dover, but things are constantly happening in Calais. These people have got little lockdown pictures. Imagine they took 10 photos, and they're taking these photos with them. And as they're heading towards Calais, everything behind them gets less and less important. You know, there could be a fire at the local, manufacturing plant, but it wouldn't affect them much because it's behind them and it's getting further away from them. And as they're heading towards Calais, whatever's happening there is going to affect them more and more and more. And this sounds overly simplistic. What I am saying is that your future is what you're heading towards physically. As you're heading towards it, loads of things are changing. You can't really predict it. In essence, the reason we can see the past but not the future is because what we call the past is really, actually, if you're being very logical and pedantic, the contents of your head. That's what you're looking at. We think that it also points to something else. Hopefully I've shown you those pictures of maps and stuff like that. That's not necessarily true. What we call the future is typically something that is literally around the corner. So the question, why can we see the past but not the future, becomes why can you see the contents of your head but not through brick walls? That's because you're looking inwards at the contents of your head, but you can't look around a corner. But if you think about it in terms of everything just happening somewhere, you can see that that makes sense. You're looking at the contents of your head. When I remember going to Rokesley School, I'm looking at the contents of my head. When I wonder what it's going to be like in Crouch End when I get home, I'm thinking about a place that's a while away from me or a distance away from here that's constantly changing. Everything's constantly changing.